I grew up in northern Minnesota, where winter isn't just a season, it's a test. By the time I was 23, I thought I'd seen every kind of storm the state could throw at me. I was wrong. It was February 2019. I'd been house-sitting for my aunt's friend, a woman named Mrs. Kozlowski, while she visited family in Duluth. The house was about 40 minutes outside of Bemidji, down a county road that saw maybe 3 cars a day in good weather. It was one of those old farmhouses that had been in the same family for generations, solid, quiet, and surrounded by white pine forest on 3 sides. The forecast had called for snow, but that wasn't unusual. 6 to 8 inches, they said. I'd stocked up on groceries, made sure the generator had gas, and settled in with a book. Mrs. Kozlowski had a landline but no cell service out there, which didn't bother me. I liked the quiet. The snow started around noon on a Thursday. By 3 o'clock I knew the forecast had been wrong. The wind came up fast, and the snow fell so thick I couldn't see the tree line anymore. I called my mom on the landline to let her know I was fine, that I'd just ride it out. She made me promise to check in the next day. By evening, the power went out. I got the generator running and kept the heat on in the living room and kitchen. The rest of the house I let go cold, no point wasting fuel. I made dinner, read by lamplight, and tried not to think about how isolated I was. The wind screamed against the windows. Snow piled up against the north side of the house, so high it covered the lower panes. I went to bed around 11. The guest room was on the 2nd floor, and I'd left a small space heater running to keep it tolerable. I remember lying there listening to the storm, thinking about how Mrs. Kozlowski had lived in this house alone for 15 years after her husband died. I wondered if she ever got scared. I woke up sometime after 2 in the morning. The house was silent except for the wind. No, not silent. There was something else, a rhythmic scraping sound, faint but persistent. I lay still, trying to place it. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. I got up and grabbed my phone for the flashlight. The hallway was freezing. I crept down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The scraping stopped. I stood in the dark living room, shining my light around. Nothing. The generator hummed outside. The wind howled. I checked the front door locked. The back door locked. All the windows were secure. I convinced myself it was just the storm. Old houses make noise. I went back to bed. The next morning the snow had stopped, but the wind hadn't. Drifts rose 6 feet high in places. The county road was completely buried. I wasn't going anywhere. I tried the landline to call my mom, but the line was dead, probably weighed down by snow somewhere between the house and the main road. I spent the morning shoveling a path to the generator and bringing in more firewood from the shed. The cold was brutal. My fingers ached even through my gloves. When I came back inside, I made coffee and stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the white expanse. That's when I noticed the tracks. They came from the tree line on the east side of the property, crossed the yard, and disappeared around the north side of the house. They weren't animal tracks. They were boot prints. Someone had walked up to the house during the storm. I felt my stomach drop. I grabbed my coat and went outside, following the tracks. They led right up to the living room window, the one I'd been sitting beside the night before. There were several prints there, close together, like someone had stood for a while. Then the tracks continued around to the back door. They stopped at the door, and then they didn't go anywhere else. There were no tracks leading away. I checked the back door again. Locked. No sign of forced entry. I searched the property, my heart pounding, but there was nothing. No one. The tracks just ended. I went back inside and locked every door and window. I pushed a chair against the back door. I tried to think rationally. Maybe someone had been lost in the storm, looked for shelter, and then circled back the way they came, stepping in their own prints. But that didn't make sense. The snow had been coming down so hard their tracks should have been filled in within an hour. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a knife from the kitchen, watching the windows. The generator ran out of fuel around midnight, and I didn't go outside to refill it. I sat in the dark and the cold, listening. Around 3 a.m, I heard it again. The scraping sound. This time I knew where it was coming from. The basement. Mrs. Kozłowski had told me I didn't need to go down there. Nothing down there but junk and spiders, she'd said. I hadn't thought about it twice. Now I stood at the top of the basement stairs, shining my phone light down into the darkness. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate. I didn't go down. I'm not proud of that, but I didn't. I went back to the living room and waited for sunrise. When the sun came up, the scraping had stopped. I opened the basement door and forced myself to go down. The stairs were wooden and steep. The basement was unfinished concrete floor, stone foundation, exposed beams. Boxes and old furniture were shoved against the walls. In the far corner, beneath a small snow-covered window, the concrete floor was scraped in long, deliberate lines, fresh lines. The window was locked from the inside. There was no other way in or out. The roads were cleared 2 days later. I left before Mrs. Kozłowski came back. I didn't tell her what I found. I haven't been back to that house since. She still lives there. Sometimes I think about calling her, asking if she ever hears anything at night. But I don't think I want to know the answer. The truck stop was the last place I wanted to spend the night, but I didn't have a choice. I'd been driving from Fargo to Billings for a job interview, and the weather forecast had been clear when I left that morning. By the time I hit the Montana border, the sky was the color of old concrete, and the wind was strong enough to shove my car across the lane. The radio crackled with warnings. Whiteout conditions. Interstate closed ahead. Travelers advised to seek shelter immediately. I took the next exit and found myself on a 2-lane highway that cut through flat, empty prairie. The only structure for miles was a truck stop with a diner attached, sitting alone against the gray sky. A few semi-trucks were parked in the lot, engines idling to keep warm. I pulled in, grabbed my bag, and ran inside. The diner was small, a counter with stools, a handful of booths, and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the 70s. A couple of truckers sat at the counter, nursing coffee. An older man in a Carhartt jacket sat alone in a booth by the window, staring out at the snow that had started to fall. I slid into a booth and ordered coffee. The waitress, whose name tag read Darlene, told me the interstate wouldn't reopen until morning at the earliest. "You're welcome to wait it out here," she said. "We don't close." I nodded, watching the snow come down harder. The wind rattled the windows. The truckers left one by one as the night wore on, heading back to their cabs to sleep. By 11 o'clock, it was just me, Darlene, and the old man by the window. Darlene wiped down the counter and refilled my coffee without asking. "Storm's supposed to get worse before it gets better," she said. The old man hadn't moved in over an hour. He sat perfectly still, hands folded on the table, staring out into the dark. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the back of his head and the reflection of the diner lights in the window. Around midnight, Darlene told me she was going to take a break in the back. "Holler if you need anything," she said, disappearing through a door behind the counter. I was alone with the old man. The diner was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the wind outside. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. I thought about trying to sleep, but something about the old man bothered me. He still hadn't moved. I got up and walked to the restroom, passing his booth. I glanced at him as I went by. He wasn't blinking. His eyes were fixed on the window, but they were glassy, unfocused. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. In the restroom, I splashed water on my face and told myself I was being paranoid. When I came back out, the old man was gone. His booth was empty. His coffee cup was still there, half full. I looked around. The diner was empty. I walked to the front door and looked out at the parking lot. The snow was coming down in sheets now, and I could barely see my car. There were no footprints leading away from the building. The old man's truck, if he'd had one, wasn't there. Darlene came back out. "Where'd he go?" I asked. She looked at the empty booth, then at me. "Who?" "The guy who was sitting by the window." Her face went pale. She walked over to the booth and touched the coffee cup. It was cold. "How long was he here?" "Hours," I said. "You saw him?" "He was here when I came in." Darlene shook her head slowly. "Honey, there's been nobody here but you and me since those truckers left." I stared at her. "That's not possible." "He was sitting right there." She didn't say anything. She just looked at the booth, then out at the storm. "Maybe you should get some rest," she said quietly. I didn't rest. I sat at the counter, watching the door, watching the windows. Darlene stayed behind the counter, cleaning things that were already clean. Neither of us talked about the old man. Around 4 a.m, I saw something move outside. A figure, walking through the snow toward the diner. Slow, deliberate steps. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark shape against the white. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Darlene looked. Her face went hard. She reached under the counter and pulled out a baseball bat. "Stay here," she said. The figure stopped about 20 feet from the front door. It stood there, motionless, facing the diner. Darlene didn't move. I didn't breathe. After what felt like an hour, the figure turned and walked back toward the highway. It disappeared into the snow. Darlene put the bat away. "Sometimes people get lost in storms," she said. "Sometimes they don't want to be found." The roads opened around 10 the next morning. I left without finishing my coffee. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if the old man was ever really there. But sometimes when I'm driving at night and I see a truck stop in the distance, I keep going. My girlfriend Sarah and I rented a cabin in the White Mountains of New Hampshire for a long weekend in January. It was supposed to be romantic, a quiet getaway, just the two of us, away from work in the city. The cabin was small but nice, tucked into the woods about a mile off the main road. The owners lived in Boston and rented it out year-round. They'd left instructions on the kitchen counter and a note welcoming us. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The sky was overcast, and the temperature was dropping, but the cabin was warm. We unpacked, made dinner, and spent the evening by the fireplace. Sarah fell asleep on the couch, and I stayed up reading. It was peaceful, perfect, even. The snow started overnight. When I woke up Saturday morning, there were already 8 inches on the ground, and it was still coming down. Sarah made coffee while I shoveled the front steps. The cold was sharp, and the wind was picking up. I checked my phone, no service, but that was expected. The cabin had Wi-Fi, but it was spotty. By mid-afternoon, the snow had piled up past a foot. The power flickered a few times, but stayed on. Sarah suggested we drive into town for supplies, just in case, but when I looked out at the driveway, I could see it was already too late. My car was buried. The road was gone, just a smooth blanket of white. "We'll be fine," I told her. "We've got food, heat, and each other." She smiled, but I could see she was a little uneasy. Sarah didn't like being cut off from the world. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a signal. That night we heard the knocking. It was soft at first, almost polite. 3 knocks on the front door. We looked at each other. I got up and went to the door, turning on the porch light. Nothing, just snow, falling thick and fast. No footprints. No one there. Indeed. I closed the door and locked it. "Probably a branch hitting the house," I said. 20 minutes later, it happened again. 3 knocks, same door. This time Sarah came with me. I opened the door quickly, thinking maybe I'd catch whoever it was. No one. The porch was buried in snow. There were no tracks anywhere. We went to bed uneasy. The wind howled all night, and I kept waking up, listening for the knocking. It didn't come again. Sunday morning, the storm had worsened. The snow was up to the windows on the north side of the cabin. The power went out around 9. We had a generator, but it was in a shed out back, and I couldn't get to it through the drifts. We bundled up and tried to keep warm by the fireplace. Around noon, Sarah went to use the bathroom. She came back a minute later, her face pale. "There's someone outside." I followed her to the bathroom window, which faced the back of the cabin. Through the snow, I could see a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. It was too far away to make out any details, but it was human. Just standing there, motionless. I grabbed my coat and went outside. The cold hit me like a punch. I waded through the snow toward the trees, yelling, asking if they needed help. The figure didn't move. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person. It was a coat hung on a tree branch, snapping in the wind. I felt like an idiot. I went back inside, shaking with cold and adrenaline. Sarah was relieved, but I could tell she was still rattled. That night, the knocking came back. This time it wasn't on the front door. It moved around the cabin first, a side window, then the back door, then the front again. 3 knocks, always 3, slow and deliberate. We sat in the living room with the fireplace between us and the doors, holding each other, not speaking. The knocking stopped around midnight. We didn't sleep. Monday morning, the storm broke. The sun came out, blinding against the snow. We dug out the car and left as soon as we could. We didn't say much on the drive home. When we got back to the city, Sarah broke up with me 2 weeks later. She said the trip had made her realize we weren't right for each other, but I knew it was something else. She'd felt it too. I called the cabin owners a month later and asked if anyone else had reported anything strange. The woman on the phone was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We don't rent it out in winter anymore." I didn't ask why. I think I already knew.